Those of you that were here last year may recall that we used the conference to announce the appointment of Rebecca in the adult safeguarding role in Bromley. That is her entire workday, shall I say. That's all she does. That makes it sound awful, doesn't it? But I realised on transferring to the Metropolitan Police from a different force that having an adult safeguarding coordinator was not something that was common in the Met, and I was a little bit confused as to why that was. It's still not common. Bex is one of only two in 32 boroughs. However, when she speaks in a minute and she goes through the amount of work she's had to do over the last 12 months, I'm sure you'll realise and wonder, as I do, how everybody manages without one. And I'm sure that colleagues in Bromley Safeguarding will agree that she's been a huge help to everybody this year. But I'm quickly going to just run through the Community Safety Unit at Bromley, tell you who we are and what we do, and then let Rebecca talk about the interesting stuff. So what do we deal with in the CSU? We deal with domestic violence, domestic abuse, all hate crime, honour-based abuse, which is an awful term, but that's what it's called. And strangely enough, carer abuse, including care home investigations. Who are we? I have 3 teams, each with a detective sergeant and about 6 detective constables, which sounds a lot, doesn't it? But sometimes I wonder where they all are, I tell you. So what do? They deal with suspects who've been arrested and are waiting for us in the cells every morning, suspects that have been arrested for any of those types of crimes that we've just talked about. So domestic, anything with a domestic violence flag in it, and any hate crime. They carry an investigative workload, and each of them probably carries between 12 and 15 active criminal investigations. So they become very good at spinning plates. As a detective in the Met, certainly, you have to be good at that. You're trying to keep 12 victims happy at once. You're trying to process 12 suspects, in some cases more. You're trying to gather evidence on 12 active crimes. It's a tough job. Happily for me, and my boss is sat over there somewhere, in the last 12 months the CSU has gone from the 26th in the Met to 3rd, and I actually believe we're 2nd now in respect of detected cases. So what we class as a detected case is something that we've managed to get a suspect charged or cautioned with. That's a detection for us. What happens at court then is something different, but the way we are measured is on those detections. Happily for us, we've now got a detection rate of about 32%. So 1/3 of all the cases that we investigate, we manage to get a charge or a positive outcome out of. It doesn't sound a lot, does it? But we were down at like 22, 20, 19, 20% at some point. So we're happy with the increase. And in any 24-hour period, so when I hit my search on a morning on my computer with regards to the crimes that have come in the last 24 hours, I've usually got 12 or 15 reports to allocate every day. So it's like a sausage factory. It's just constant. What's happening? We also have a Dauntless team, Operation Dauntless. They deal with our highest risk suspects, our highest risk victims. Generally, the two are together, and any emerging threat. We have a hate crime liaison officer. We have independent domestic sexual violence advocates. We used to have them in the office, police station based, for 5 days a week. We now just get them for 1 day a week, and it's a huge loss to us. We don't get to deal with the walk-in customers that we used to. We wish we could get them back, but I don't think we will. We have a MARAC coordinator. Operation Aero. I don't want to say too much about it, but I'll just put this up anyway. So in November 2016, via Rebecca's referral system, we were informed about alleged abuse at a care home. This has now developed into a major investigation, which many people in this room are involved with. I've had to ring-fence a team of detectives to look at this. Such is the enormity of the task which faces us. It's a detective sergeant and 3 DCs. Currently, there are 6 ex-employees, I might say, none of whom who had a DBS. That was my point about earlier. The 6 people that we arrested, none of them had DBS checks done. They're currently under investigation. None of them are on bail anymore. And following consultation with the CPS, we've now got an action plan with over 140 actions. We've managed to get the case to a specialist case unit in the CPS. The CPS initially, A, didn't want to look at it at all. Then B, gave us a, without being derogatory, the run-of-the-mill CPS, if you like. Well, their workload is even bigger than ours, so they weren't interested. So we wanted to go to the specialist case unit that deals with the murder investigations and the complex investigations like that. So we appealed, pushed back a little bit. We eventually got a CPS solicitor allocated to our case. We've had 2 case conferences with her, and when we came back with over 140 actions, we wished we hadn't. And that still doesn't mean that we're actually going to get any criminal charges out of the case. We'll see what happens. And I think I'll be gone this time next year, but certainly Rebecca will be able to update you as to, well, how it's progressed. And we have an adult safeguarding coordinator, Rebecca, who in the past year has identified over 500 vulnerable adults and provided an appropriate response to each case. So it makes me wonder, the point that I was making at the beginning was, where did all that work go to before Rebecca was in place? It must have gone somewhere. I haven't got the answer. It must have gone somewhere, and all I can say is I'm thankful that she is now in place. She's going to go through some case studies and just talk about the interesting stuff.
Hello, everyone. I thought I'd decide to give you sort of a brief overview of what I've been up to for the past year. I can get this to... Thank you. Is it not working? There we go. So, like D.I. Wood just said, I've had over 500 reports that have come through to me. And that's from October last year up until sort of the end of September. It works out about, it's more than that now obviously, because since I wrote this presentation the number's gone up. But out of the 525 vulnerable adults that came to notice, 235 of those were elderly victims, and that works out about 44%. The decision how to record who is vulnerable is down to the initial officer. So the uniformed police officer who goes to the call, when they speak to that victim, they make the decision on when they're vulnerable or not. So the actual rate of elderly victims is much higher, but these are the vulnerable ones that get flagged up to me. And when I'm using the term elderly, I'm using 65 and above, which I think is the standard. I have to apologise for the statistics that I'm going to throw up. They're very, very confusing, as I found out when I read this to my husband last night. And he was completely baffled, so I can only apologise. The main crimes affecting the elderly in Bromley are fraud, which is 36% out of that 225 I mentioned earlier. 11% of those are victims of courier fraud. This is where suspects call up an elderly person pretending to be from the bank. They'll say, we've got fraudulent activity on your bank, and we need to have your bank card, and we need to have your PIN number. We're really, really nice, we're lovely. We're going to send a courier around to your address, and we're going to take that card and that PIN number from you, and we'll replace it. So don't worry, we've got it all in hand. The elderly victim will then hand over their card and their PIN number, and they can lose hundreds, if not thousands of pounds within hours. 81% of the victims of this 225 are victims of fraud by false representation. Now, this is when someone pretends to be someone else to get details or get them to withdraw money from the bank and give them the cash. There's also, obviously, a huge fraud by abusive position, which is where carers are going into addresses and they're stealing, or they're taking money from the elderly that way and taking advantage of them. The 81% equals to about 70 victims from that 225. Got the next. Thank you. The other type of crime that has been affecting our elderly victims is burglary, attempted burglary and aggravated burglary. We've had one case of kidnap. We've had 6 cases of neglect where people are entrusted to care for those victims, but they haven't. And I've got a case study about one of those coming up. And as Mr. Wood mentioned earlier, we've got a few care home jobs that are currently in the process of being investigated. The neglect kinds of cases are extremely complex, and they rely on not just the detective doing their investigation, but also partner agency work, which is what we've been doing a lot of in the past year, and it's been working really well. A lot of the cases are still being investigated. Like I said, they're quite long and they're quite complex, so I can't tell you too much about those, but I can tell you that in the past year we've had 7 adult cautions, 14 community resolutions, which is where people both agree that something has happened and it gets resoluted that way, and 58 charges brought against these perpetrators. Right, now on to the case studies. There have been a number of challenges throughout the year, but I thought you'd like to know some of the success stories we've had and some of the difficulties that we've faced and we're continuing to face. So this first case involved a 90-year-old woman who lived in a home. It was her own home with her son. He claimed that he was her carer, but he was actually controlling her every movement. This was down to what she ate, when she ate it. If she didn't eat her main meal, he wouldn't give her any pudding. He had violent mood swings where he assaulted her, and he would fix the doors. He'd fixed all the doors so that she couldn't shut them. So they were always open so he could see what she was doing at all times. This obviously had quite an effect on her mental health. So what we did, we met up with the social worker, and we met at the victim's house. And this enabled us to be able to speak to her and see what she wanted to do. It put her at the centre of it all, which is what we're all meant to be doing. The victim's wishes were for her son to be spoken to and warned. That's all she wanted. However, due to the nature of what he'd been doing, as police, in order to talk to him, we need to be able to speak to him under police caution. It enabled us also, by talking to him on police caution, to be able to put bail conditions on him, which kept him out of the house and away from her, keeping her safe. I was also able to speak and liaise with her solicitors, who were putting things in place to secure that house and make sure that he couldn't get back in. When all of this had gone through and she was set and she was feeling safe and in control again, she withdrew her allegation, essentially, which meant that he was released from his bail conditions. In these kind of cases, we have to weigh up what is the best interests of the victim. So it might not ordinarily be sending that person to court, because you're putting an elderly person through the whole process of court. We had to sort of think, well, is this in the public interest to summons her, make her go? And it wasn't. She got what she needed. She got him out of the house. She was safe. It enabled her family to come and support her more. And so it was quite a positive result. Oh, right, stop there. I need to just do... This next case is quite disturbing. And I know it's a long time after dinner. There's no pictures, but it doesn't leave much to the imagination. So just as a little warning. It's an ongoing investigation, but I wanted to sort of share certain bits of it and show some of the nastier bits that we've been dealing with as well. Thank you. So she's a 91-year-old female, admitted to hospital after her daughter called the ambulance. When she was admitted, she had necrotic ulcers, and these were filled with maggots. She had maggots everywhere else. What flagged it up to the hospital was the fact that the daughter didn't visit at all. She just didn't seem to care. And then as our investigation has gone on, we've got concerns of financial abuse that the daughter may well be after her mother's house. The LAS, the ambulance service, said that the house was in a state of extreme neglect, which we found as, when we go on to the next page, with what we did. So in order to get into this house, we went to the Magistrates' Court and we got a Section 8 warrant. And this means that we're able to enter an address if the occupants don't want to let us in. And we're looking for evidence. And we have to be very specific about the kind of evidence that we're looking for. We had the local policing team who helped us and SOCO who came to take the photos. So there are scenes of crimes officers. The carpets had all been torn up from the floor because they had been and were saturated with faeces. There were soiled clothes in the kitchen that were also soiled, and the smell, as you can imagine, was intense. Both the daughter and her partner have been interviewed with regards to this, and they're currently still under investigation for it. However, the elderly female now is out of hospital, she's healing, and she's in a care home that can support her needs. So she's safe as well. And our last one, this one's a bit of a sad one. It shows basically how domestic violence can affect anyone from any age. There's an 83-year-old woman, and she suffered over 50 years of domestic violence at the hands of her husband, who was an ex-boxer. He would eat the expensive food and just leave her to eat the scraps. She was beaten so regularly that when we came to talk to her, she couldn't distinguish when any certain attack had happened. They'd all rolled into one. And she only came to notice when a member of the public saw her being assaulted by him and heard her cries for help. She can remember once when they were on holiday and they were eating a nice meal, and he suddenly punched her in the face. No reason whatsoever, just punched her. She lived in constant fear, basically, of not knowing when the next attack was going to happen. So what we did, we put the victim in touch with an IDSVA, which, as Mr. Wood said, absolutely fantastic, brilliant people. And we did have them in the office, but like we said, they've gone now, which is a real shame. She's been given brilliant support by Anne Thorne. The suspect was charged and he was remanded by the court. Now, this guy is in his late 80s, and for the court to actually remand someone, which means put them in prison until they have their trial date, shows how serious they took the case at that time. So he went to prison until his trial date. However, when it came to his sentencing, he was given a community order. But he was also given a restraining order, not to contact her, not to go anywhere near her. It was going to end up on a really positive note. However, I got an email yesterday with an update to this case, which I thought, well, I'm going to share with you guys anyway. The suspect went back to court last week to ask for a variation to his restraining order. What it said was that he wasn't allowed to go to that home address without a police officer due to the nature of his offending and how violent he had been to her for so many years and how terrified she is of this man. That judge made the decision that the victim, she has to leave her house, the one place where she feels safe, for 3 hours every day or whenever he wants, so that he can go and collect some possessions and do an inventory of stuff in the house. And this has understandably left her completely terrified. The judge told her that he would take off the necessity for a police officer to be present when he's there. And they've also allowed him to live one street away from her. This is a man who has systematically assaulted and abused his wife for over 50 years, and he's one street away from her. Luckily, she's got a really good team of local officers. They're planning on coming in on their own rest days to make sure that when he's in there, they'll be there, and to continue to offer her the support that she needs. And I think that this shows you that the police officers, despite what the courts are doing, the Bromley's police officers will go above and beyond for our vulnerable victims. Right. So looking towards the next year, there's lots and lots of things that I'm going to be doing. But one of the main things is pushing out the Herbert Protocol to all our Bromley police officers. It's a really useful bit of kit. I don't know whether many of you are aware of it, but it's going to mean that should any of our dementia sufferers go missing, we'll have bits of information about them that will enable us to be able to hopefully find them that much quicker. Hoarding and self-neglect are still big issues with all of us, and we're going to continue linking in with the London Fire Brigade and with London Borough of Bromley in regards to that. And basically continue to build all the relationships and all the colleagues that I've made over the past year, and keep that going, because I think it seems to be working really, really well. Thank you.